I got quite a few of my predictions about the first round of the Stanley Cup Playoffs wrong. Let's audit our takes. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Theory of Hockey Show. I am your host, Nick Zararis. Theory of Hockey is the home of Do You Know Puck, the first ever interactive trivia game where you can test your NHL knowledge against other fans like yourself and me who makes the quizzes at theoryofhockey.com/puck. Be sure to check it out. The link is down in the show notes. The game is entirely free. Test your knowledge, get involved, and see how long you can keep your streak going. So on today's show, we're going to walk through a variety of storylines through the early stages of the Stanley Cup playoffs. I want to start out talking about both the Carolina Hurricanes Flyers game from Monday night and then the Minnesota and Colorado game from Sunday night. Then from there, we're going to bounce around the first round series that ended. I'm going to dive into why I was wrong about Edmonton, why I was wrong about the Penguins, why I was wrong about the Lightning, and really try and distill out where the takes come from and why I think it's important to go into accountability. So to start out, I picked Dallas against Minnesota in that first round series, and Minnesota played a pretty good game against Colorado on Sunday night. I know they lost 9-6. I know the game was chaotic, a lot of offense, a lot of chances, but I really do think that series has a chance to be the best series we get all postseason. Now, the Tampa Bay Montreal series, which we'll talk about later, was extremely close, very tight, low scoring, lots of overtimes. But the caliber of hockey that's being played so far, at least through one game in that Minnesota-Dallas series, I think that's a really good sneak peek at where hockey is going. Now, I'd said that after the gold medal game at this year's Olympics, where the U.S. and Canada, pretty much everybody out there could skate at a 85th percentile or better pace. The Kachuk brothers notwithstanding, because of their other traits, get a pass. But for the most part, in today's game, if you want to play at that highest possible level, you need to have a raw level of foot speed. There are some players who have such good hockey instincts and such good hockey IQ that they can get by not being as of good skater, but that's an extremely limited case. I think for the most part now, based on where the NHL is at and where I think it's going, your baseline, I think being a good skater gives you a high floor. I think having good hockey instincts is what gives you a high ceiling. I think if you're a raw skating talent with a lot of foot speed, you're going to hang around for a while. And you look at guys like Jeff Skinner and Jack Roslovic and Kasperi Kapanen, all three of whom have been with the Edmonton Oilers recently, and all three of whom have really high-end straight-line skate speed. And two of those three still have plus shots in Kapanen and Roslovic. Jeff Skinner's shot, not nearly as good as it was 5-10 years ago, but still, once upon a time, Jeff Skinner was a really high-end shooter. And I use those guys as examples because you have watched them over time get phased out. And it's crazy to me because we'll talk about Roslovic more when we do the Edmonton segment. But he scored 21 goals this year at less than $2 million per. And there's basically no chance he comes back to the Oilers next year based on what his contract demands will probably be and where the Oilers are at money-wise. And I think that's crazy when you look at where we were at just as recently as 5 or 10 years ago. And I think the Minnesota-Colorado series really distills out that idea of where hockey is going, because these are some of the very few teams that have multiple high-end puck movers on the back end. And that's really the secret sauce to today's NHL. It's not just you need good defensemen. That's always been a given. Regardless of where the game was at, you needed guys who were able to play that position well. But the demands and the expectations of that position, especially at the higher end, are fundamentally different now. You look at where the NHL was at 10 years ago, and you think about guys like Shea Weber and Drew Doughty. Defense first guys, 50 to 60 points at the absolute highest of end for Doughty. But those guys were considered the best defensemen in the world. You look at someone like a Duncan Keith, never put up crazy 80, 90 point counting stats. That's partly because of the era he played in, where it wasn't as high scoring as it is now. And guys like Cale Makar and Evan Bouchard and Adam Fox and Quinn Hughes can all consistently flirt with point per game paces at that position in a way the game wouldn't have been conducive to a decade ago. But the secret, if you're wondering, that's how you get paid at that position. If you want to be a 9, a 10, if you want to be Quinn Hughes and you want to maybe be the NHL's first $20 million a year player as soon as next summer, you need to have offensive contributions. Because in today's NHL, offense is always going to be more valuable than defense. It's always going to be more valuable than goaltending. That's why the highest paid players in this league are the ones who can make offense as often as possible with as little help as possible. And there are some counterbalances to that. You know, Drew Doughty is still raking in, living off the fat of a deal he signed an extremely long time ago that made him one of the highest paid players in the league. And he's still one of the 5 highest paid defensemen in the NHL. But you think about where that position is at. So right now, I'm going to just whip my fingers, and this won't be everybody, but Hughes and Makar, undoubtedly 2 of the 3 best of this era. Adam Fox is right there with him. When you look at the underlying numbers, you look at the even strength numbers, Adam Fox is every bit as good as those guys, even if he doesn't necessarily have the hardware or get the recognition of those 2, because he doesn't skate as well as Hughes or as Makar. But those 3, for my money, are the 3 best defensemen in the NHL. You have Heiskanen and Thomas Harley. And these aren't in order, by the way. After those first 3, they're not in order. Heiskanen and Thomas Harley are both guys who, if everything breaks right for them, could hypothetically win a Norris Trophy. You have Charlie McAvoy. You have Rasmus Dahlin. That's 7 guys who are all elite upper echelon players at the position. Evan Bouchard, who had a really tough series against Anaheim. We'll talk about him in depth during that series. That's 8. We're already at 8 guys who could be Norris candidate caliber players. Jackson Lacombe in that Duck series, I think someday has a chance to be a Norris caliber player. You think about Roman Josi, who is fading now and not the star caliber he was 5 years ago, but that's still a really high-end player. Erik Karlsson had a really nice bounce back year for the Penguins. I was thinking about his 100-point season for the Sharks. That's what was the impetus for tripping on my words there. You look at the way that some of these guys, I would be remiss if I didn't mention how Lane Hudson has really jumped into the league full storm the last 2 years, where he won the Calder last year over Celebrini, and he was a really important piece for Montreal this year. And you go down the list. We arguably have Josh Morrissey, who I didn't mention, who got injured at the Olympics, has had a hard time staying healthy. That's a fringe Norris guy for me. There are so many good players at that position now who are capable of impacting the game at the high end offensively. And that really unlocks doors for you, because you think about what Quinn Hughes does well. It's playing with anticipation. It's using his edge work to create space for himself when he himself is carrying the puck. And most of all, it's instincts. The one pass he makes to set up that goal early on in game 1 is as good as it gets for playing with anticipation. And one of the interesting trickle-down effects of the last 5 to 10 years, something I'd always thought, and largely based on my own experiences of playing sports as a kid, you want to divide up your talent across your lineup. You know, you don't want to put your 2 best players on the ice at the same time. You don't want to have 2 ball-dominant point guards on the court at the same time in basketball. You want to put both of those guys in a unique position to do what they do best. And for teams that are fortunate enough to have multiple truly high-end players, I had always thought, especially when you have an elite offensive forward and an elite offensive defenseman, I had always surmised you were better off playing those 2 separately. Because if you could have a number 1 defenseman that plays 23, 24 minutes per night, and you have an elite number 1 forward, hopefully a center, but you can get away with it if it's a winger, who plays 22 or 23 minutes per night, they'll overlap for a couple minutes on your power play, your first power play unit. But by and large, your goal in an ideal world, the way I used to think, was you want to have each of those guys on the ice for a separate 19 minutes from each other. That way you have almost 2/3 of the game where you're going to have a chance to have the best player on the ice at any given point. Now, as we have watched the last 5 to 10 years of this wave of defensemen come in, headlined by Hughes, Makar, and Adam Fox, you have watched those teams consciously and actively put their best forward on the ice with those guys to amplify their best traits. Right now in Minnesota, Quinn gets a good chunk, not all, but a good chunk of his 5-on-5 minutes with Kirill Kaprizov. Obviously, they play power play 1 together. We know Makar and McKinnon play pretty heavily together, even strength and on special teams. We know that McKinnon's numbers help Makar. We know Makar's numbers aren't as good with McKinnon as they are away from him. The Rangers, the years of Artemi Panarin and Adam Fox overlapping at even strength, strong indicator. And I think you look at what Miro Heiskanen was able to do with Jason Robertson in that series in the first round. The part of this that's tricky and why it's hard to synthesize and explain well-rounded, everything in hockey is downstream of each other. So if you're a good offensive defenseman, that means you're good at getting where you need to be in the defensive zone so you can break the puck out. That's the first part of being a good offensive defenseman. Now, you might not think of being in your own zone and trying to move the puck where it needs to go as being offense. You would probably associate those traits more with defense, but it's all interconnected. If you're a defenseman who can time after time get to loose pucks, break it out cleanly, and either pass the puck out of the zone or skate the puck out of the zone yourself, you are creating offense. You know, it's not to the same degree of what we say with McDavid, with Celebrini, with McKinnon, where those guys carry the puck into the offensive zone with speed. And that in of itself raises the tide for all the other players who are on the ice with them because they don't have to manufacture the zone entry, which is the hardest part of transition. That's the juice here. If you have Hughes, if you have Makar, you get clean breakouts almost every single time they're out there. Now, in an ideal world, you're able to complement your puck mover with a puck retriever. Puck retriever is a different skill set. Now, in an ideal world, you would have somebody who is good at both, somebody who is big, someone who is immobile, and someone who can handle the puck. But because of the limitations of human development, most of the time guys who are bigger are going to emphasize those traits. You know, that's what makes a guy like Dahlin, like Jackson Lacombe, like Travis Sanheim. Sanheim not as good offensively as Dahlin or Lacombe, but still a very strong skater, somebody who moves well, and somebody who can move the puck. You want those guys getting to loose pucks and breaking out. And what makes those skill sets in particular valuable when you have both, you know, when you have a defenseman who can break the puck out as easily as they can win puck battles, that makes their partner's life easier. You know, it's very similar to the conversation we have as far as having guys who are both good distributors and good shooters. When you are good at both, that unlocks doors for whoever you happen to be out there on the ice with. In the case of these defensemen, and I got numbers for you, with Quinn Hughes in game number 1, the Wild had 61% of the scoring attempts, 64% of the shot attempts. They outscored the Avalanche 4-3. They had 66% of the expected goals. This comes in the midst of a playoffs where when the Wild have Hughes and Kaprizov out there at the same time together, they are outscoring opponents 7-3 through the first 7 games of their playoff experience. Makar, the numbers aren't as good. 18-21 scoring chances, 13 shot attempts, 3-1 goals for and against, 41% expected goals, 55% of the high dangers. Nothing crazy, but that's something to keep in mind. And I bring these numbers up not because I want to pit these two against each other. I think these are unequivocally the two best guys in the league, physical traits wise. I think Makar is as much of a unicorn as you are going to see at that position. His ability to skate as well as he does at that position is pretty much unheard of in the contemporary NHL. Now, we will see how he stands up as the playoffs go along. He took the big hit from Foligno in game number 1, only played about 18 minutes. Sure, I think the Avalanche getting out to a lead helped alleviate the need to use him as much. We'll see as the series goes along how he handles it. I expect Quinn Hughes to play 25 minutes plus pretty much every night the rest of the way. I think that Spurgeon-Middleton pair is asking for trouble against Colorado, and I've always been really high on Jared Spurgeon. But he's old now. He's not as fast as he used to be. And what makes Colorado and to some extent Minnesota dangerous is their capacity to constantly turn over offense. You know, it's very reminiscent of what the Vegas Golden Knights did a couple years ago when they won the Stanley Cup. What made Vegas so damn hard to play against was their ability to just keep coming at you in waves, to forecheck, to move the puck where they wanted it to carry the puck into the zone with speed, to create numbers advantages, to manipulate defenses, to really take advantage of what was in front of them. And I thought Colorado did a really good job of that throughout pretty much all of this game. I know Minnesota gets out to the lead for a decent chunk of it, but Colorado's ability to hang in there, and that's why Colorado is so dangerous and why game one is proof of concept for them. Not only were they never out of that game, they were able to emphatically come back and win the game convincingly. That should give you real pause before you begin to doubt Colorado. Now, as for Dallas, who eliminated in round one as part of the beginning of this audit of the takes I got wrong, and I do think this is important. So we're going to go through. I won't have as much analysis for every series as equal with each other, but I do have some thoughts for each. And I want to walk you through my thought process because I do think this is important. One of the great problems of our time now is the competition for attention. As you guys may or may not know, I read Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace not that long ago, finished it probably about 2 weeks ago. And the central theme of the book is us amusing ourselves to death. That if given the opportunity to watch something that would kill us, we would still watch it as long as it gave us pleasure. And to some degree, the sports media space has become that hyper-synthesized. It has become a never-ending competition for your attention. The easiest way to do that is lowest common denominator stuff. It is hot takes. It is people yelling at each other. It is saying things that aren't true or saying things that are true through a certain lens to try and garner a reaction. The more people engage with content, the more it gets promoted by the various algorithms on the different platforms. The more you personally engage with a given type of content, the more your algorithm is going to suggest that type of content, whether it's the theme, the style, or the creator. There is an incentive model there to get a reaction out of you, to get you to be mad at someone, to leave a comment, to get you to agree with them, to like the video. And one of the problems with that, the 24-hour news cycle and needing to fill up X number of content obligations per day, week, month, year, is that we don't revisit what we got wrong. We don't try and evaluate. We don't try and refine our processes. And that's kind of one of the ideas behind doing a show like this, doing a show based on theory and really trying to walk you guys along to getting to a deeper understanding, not a higher or a more meaningful, but giving you more tools to understand. And part of that is having the conviction to tell you when I am wrong, why I am wrong, and what my takeaway is so I don't make that mistake again. So you're not wasting your time. There are hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there. I host several of them. This show is about making hockey fans empowered to make decisions about what they think and why they think it. So through that lens, I want to start with Dallas. So number one, no Rope Hintz dramatically changes their calculus. I took the coaches at face value. I need to, at times, recall, I cannot trust what an NHL coach says as far as injury recovery. The Stars had their breakup day on Monday after being eliminated. Hintz told the media he was trying to come back from a torn hamstring. They were talking about him like he was day-to-day with a torn hamstring. That's not great. Number two, at even strength, the Stars could not get a single thing going. To the credit of the Wild, the Stars had basically no answers at even strength. They scored a ton of power play goals, and that largely sustained them, but that's no way to live. Minnesota is good, and for the Stars to go as many games as they did with as few goals, the Stars score 4 5-on-5 goals in 6 games. Now, some of that is a byproduct of just bad bounces, but as has to be your takeaway when you've been watching playoff hockey as long as I have, you got to earn your bounces. You have to earn your bounces. If you play well enough, you will start to get those 50-50 pucks. You will start to get the stupid goals. And sure, Are you going to occasionally get burned by the stupid goal? That's the nature of the sport. You want to do the right thing as often as you can to try and get the most ideal outcome. The more you work on doing the right thing, the better your chances of getting that right thing to happen. And the Stars had a great power play in this series. They had no depth scoring. They had no 5-on-5 offense. Jake Ottinger wasn't bad, but he didn't outplay Jesper Wallstedt, and that was the bar. If the Stars were going to win the series with the 5-on-5 numbers they had in this series, they needed Ottinger to be the best goalie on the planet. Now, Ottinger didn't sink them. He didn't kill them, but he wasn't good enough. And that's not to say he is bad, but as we'll talk about when it comes to Vasilevskiy in the Tampa Bay Montreal series, when the margins are small, you are expecting your star players to elevate. Dallas got a great performance out of Jason Robertson, who was their best forward in this series. Matt Duchene continues to play well into his mid-30s, was very impressed with him. Thomas Harley and Nils Lundkvist, when they were together, they did a pretty nice job. Nils Lundkvist had a pretty decent playoffs other than getting injured, and he's not ever going to be a great net front player, but I think there's enough there. But the biggest reason, and this will be a recurring theme on a lot of these, especially Edmonton and Ottawa, I have a bad habit of letting teams from years past influence my perception of that present version. When I think of the Minnesota Wild, I think of a team that gets into the playoffs and cannot score. I think of all of the Bill Guerin teams who were oriented around defense and around goaltending and would limp their way to 6 or 7 games in the first round against Vegas, against St. Louis, and end up on the short end because they could not score enough. In this series, you had Kaprizov go nuts. You had Kaprizov put up 9 points in the first five games. Ludicrous production from Kaprizov. You had the second true superstar in Quinn Hughes to supplement. Now, they didn't have Joel Eriksson Ek in game number 1. We'll see if Ek is able to return at some point in this series. Definitely something worth keeping an eye on. I don't necessarily think every game will be 9-6, but I do think I need to get over my preconceived notion of what the Wild have been in years past. This version of the team was not great post-Olympics. They did not have a great record. They were not playing great hockey. You had Guerin effectively call the team out down the stretch for their performance over the last month or so because they were not playing up to the expectations or the standard they had for themselves. This is the first time the Wild have won a playoff series in a decade. It's a real accomplishment for that franchise to be in the second round for the first time in 10 years. They are a decently constructed team. I do have questions about their center depth, but I took the last few years of the Stars and made that my compilation of what I expected the Stars to do in this series. I thought that their prioritization of the power play and their high-end players really emphasizing high danger chances was a direct recourse to how they have lost to Edmonton in the last 2 years, where the Oilers' power play was just a little bit better, where the Oilers' high-end players were able to win that high-danger chance expected goals battle and win the game on the margins, where sure, the Stars would have more volume, but the Oilers would have their 2 or 3 high-danger chances to cancel out some of the value created by the volume of chances that the Stars have created over time. And they have questions. The Stars, they have to get Jason Robertson under contract. He's a restricted free agent. Mikko Rantanen wasn't great in this series. Sure, the counting stats check out reasonably okay. His underlying were not great. He was not the dynamic, explosive player we've seen. And look, if Rantanen is just the best flash player in the world, where once every few weeks he goes crazy for 3 games and he can put up 6 points in 3 games, that's what he is. If he's just the best splash player where he can make the big flashy plays a couple times a year, great. I think he's probably capable of a little bit more of that than that, I should say. Excuse me. I think the fact he no longer gets to play with a Nathan McKinnon caliber center makes his transition work a little more suspect and requires him to do a little bit more work. Now, that's not saying Rantanen's bad. His contract might age not so great, but he is still a particularly high-end player who did not live up to his expectations in this series. Now, pivoting to Edmonton, who, by the way, was featured on the Theory of Hockey quiz on Sunday, where you had to name every player Connor McDavid assisted on a goal this season. The Ducks, who we're going to talk about in this series, are featured on tomorrow, Tuesday's puzzle, where you'll have to name the top 10 Anaheim Ducks goal scorers. That's at thetheoryofhockey.com/puck if you're interested in checking out Do You Know Puck, the first ever interactive NHL trivia game that is entirely free to you, the masses. So very much like what I had said about Minnesota, I came into this series expecting to get the version of the Oilers that I've gotten over the last 2 years in the playoffs. I thought, based on how the stretch run went last year, and if you're curious, on the Substack for Theory of Hockey that's going out on Tuesday, I wrote about the Oilers losing to the Ducks, where they go from here, and the problems they're facing. So one of the things I really emphasized in the article, which will go live at 9 Eastern on Tuesday, is the Oilers are reaching a tipping point in their window of contention. And the reason I wasn't as concerned with their performance post-Olympics this year is the fact they were pretty mediocre after the Four Nations face-off last year. Last year was proof of concept. They went 14-12-1 after coming back from Four Nations in 2025. After coming back from the Milan Olympics this year, they went 13-8-3, which is really in the same boat as far as being a mediocre hockey team. A lot of my thinking about this year's Oilers team was formulated around the idea, okay, last year, post Four Nations, they were already pretty locked into a playoff spot. They were dealing with a bunch of injuries down the stretch. They did load management. They gave guys breaks here and there to try and get them ready to ramp up for the playoffs. The Oilers didn't pass the Kings in the standings last year because, in part, they were load managing. They were more concerned with being as ready to go for the playoffs as they could be. And with that mentality, they said we didn't need home ice. And to their credit, they beat the Kings in 6. They beat the Golden Knights in 5. They beat the Stars in 5. They got to the Stanley Cup final in 16 games. That's pretty impressive. You know, to get to a Stanley Cup final in that few of games is pretty remarkable in the contemporary NHL. And the path, you know, Vegas and Dallas. Vegas last year, I was a little bit higher on than the public was. Vegas's goal scoring ultimately let them down. Part of the reason they went out and got Mitch Marner was they thought, if we're going to try and win with defense, we need defensive guys who can create some offense. And Marner is one of the better two-way wingers in the league. Eichel has really come around to a 200-foot player in a way that seemed not impossible, but really unlikely, especially when you look at the earlier stages of his career. And I bring all that up as context because going into this series against the Ducks, I looked at the Oilers and said, nothing they've done this year is particularly convincing. But they have the playoff experience. They have McDavid. They have Draisaitl. They have Bouchard. They have found ways against teams that are inferior to them. And on paper, the regular season results, the Oilers were a better team than the Ducks. The Ducks, 2 7-game losing streaks, a 9-game winning streak, a very top-heavy roster. Ironically, it was the Ryan Palings and the Alex Killorns, the depth of the Ducks, that won the Ducks this series. And the Oilers' best players were not great. All the credit in the world to Draisaitl, Kapanen, and Podkolzin. Far and away the Oilers' best line at 5-on-5. Supremely impressive. Outscored the Ducks 6-0 at even strength. Really did everything they could. The problem for the Oilers, of course, you can't win with only one line. And after McDavid rolled his ankle, the questions about how healthy he was were unavoidable. And some of the individual stat tracking stuff came out from all three zones over the course of Monday. McDavid wasn't anywhere in the leaderboards for rush entries, for chances off of rushes. And that should tell you how hurt he is, because he's always the highest person on all of those leaderboards. At the Olympics, he was the highest there. He's always the highest in the regular season. Nobody in the world is better at creating zone entries than Connor McDavid, and he couldn't do it in this series. Now, to Jackson Lacombe and the Ducks' credit, that kid can play. Lacombe is very early on in the stages of his NHL career. He's a former second-round pick. He's really, really mobile. He's 90th percentile or better in all of the skate speed zones on NHL Edge. He is somebody who has an offensive flair, who at one point in the series was over a point per game and was doing as good of a job of slowing down Connor McDavid as I've ever seen anyone do. Now, Jonas Brodin in his prime used to be able to do a good job on McDavid because he was a good skater and he had a long reach. But you usually hear people talk about wide receivers like this in football. You're not stopping him, but you can try and contain him. And look, McDavid had 6 points in 6 games, but you look at the underlyings, he got smoked. He got outscored 7-3 at even strength. That's not good enough. The Oilers have been in a slow backslide for several years now. And I made this point on Locked On Oilers on Monday, and I'll repeat it here. Think about this. In the span of the last 2 off seasons, the Oilers have lost Dylan Holloway, Ryan McLeod, Warren Fogle, Corey Perry, Evander Kane, Victor Arvidsson, Jeff Skinner. Now, none of those guys in of themselves by themselves is irreplaceable. As much as I like Holloway, and I think he's going to have a pretty nice NHL career. He signed an extension with St. Louis after signing that offer sheet there in the summer of 24. He's not irreplaceable. But the simple matter of the fact is the Oilers came into this season with as much uncertainty in their forward group as any point in the Connor McDavid era. With that said, the gambles they took, the risks they took, were not good enough. I'm going to look over here at the graphic that's in the article that's going out on the Substack. So Savoy was a gamble. He had never played a full NHL season before this year. It took Savoy 50 regular season games to figure it out. The Olympic break was the point of demarcation. After coming back from the Olympics, he had 18 points in 24 games. But those first 50 games, it was pretty lean offensively. 18 points in those first 50 games. That's not great. The Oilers gave him a decent run of it at the beginning of the year in the top 6, but ultimately Chris Knoblauch didn't trust him. Vasily Podkolzin, I got nothing bad to say about him. Probably pound for pound, buck for buck, the best player in the NHL dollar for dollar over the last 2 years, not including entry-level guys who were underpaid because of the wage structure. Podkolzin, 59-45 at even strength, the best goal split of anybody I'm going to read on this sheet. Kapanen, 22-18. Kapanen missed quite a few games this year, almost 30, didn't have the season he wanted. He wasn't bad when he played. He had really good underlying numbers playing with Podkolzin and Draisaitl, but his inability to stay healthy this year was part of the problem for the Oilers and the lineup turmoil they faced. Vasilevskiy, who they signed 2 games into the NHL season, 45-47, he got outscored. So not a terrible split, but ideally for someone who scores 21 goals, you would like a positive goal split, because that means even though he scored 21 goals and contributed on a couple more, you still lost his minutes overall at even strength for a guy who wasn't on your first power play unit. And that's not ideal. If you're a high event player and you score a lot of goals and you lose your minutes, that means you're giving up a lot the other way. So I'll be very curious. I'm pretty skeptical the Oilers would bring Vasilevskiy back. I think his playoff was wholly unremarkable. You know what's crazy? I looked up the other day. Vasilevskiy has 3 career playoff goals, and he's played in 51 playoff games. That seems almost impossible for someone who's as good of a shooter as he is, but his traits, like I said in the opening salvo, he's really fast in a straight line, and he's got a hard shot. In the playoffs, the space he usually has to create those chances isn't there. And because he himself is not a strong individual puck carrier, his chances of creating offense off the rush are limited. He's not a forecheck cycle guy, which really limits his utility in a playoff environment, especially if he's going to be on your third line in the way he was for the Oilers in this series. David Tomashek, European free agent, hung out for about 3 months, went back to Europe. He got outscored 10-6. Dart throw only cost money. Not great, but it could have gone worse. Isaac Howard. They traded their former first-round pick O'Reilly to Tampa Bay to get Howard, who wanted to play in the NHL this year. He was really good in the AHL. To Ike Howard's credit, he took going to Bakersfield in stride. He was really good down there. I imagine he's going to have an inside track to make the team next year, but they lost his minutes. And he didn't play a ton, 9-10 minutes a game, a lot of third line, not a lot of chances with McDavid or Draisaitl. But that's a guy that, even though the gamble didn't work out immediately, I'm not ready to totally give up on. Now, as you get into the wonder triplets of Trent Frederick, who was outscored 32-18, Andrew Mangiapane, who was outscored 38-21, and Adam Henrique, who was outscored 30-16, you understand the essence of the problem for the Oilers. As great as McDavid, Hyman, Nugent-Hopkins, and then Draisaitl, Kapanen, Podkolzin were in the regular season, pretty much nothing else worked. I liked the Jason Dickinson trade. I think he's a skill set the Oilers don't have a lot of, but he got hurt. And we'll see where the lineup ultimately shakes out. I think the goalie makeover on the fly was an unmitigated disaster. You saw the Avalanche last year replace both goalies in their tandem in the middle of the season and come away with Mackenzie Blackwood and Scott Wedgwood and have the best goalie tandem in the NHL by record this season. And the Oilers tried to, and they lost. You know, Tristan Jarry was worse than Stuart Skinner was as an Oiler, and Stuart Skinner ran out of town. Connor Ingram is fine. I think Connor Ingram is a B goalie in a tandem. I think he makes 35 starts, and your starter makes 47 starts. I think in an ideal world, he's the B goalie in a tandem. Now, tandem goalies seldom win Stanley Cups. That is extremely uncommon in the contemporary NHL because the impact of goaltending is minimal, but the value you lose by paying two goalies a mid-tier salary, that's another top 9 forward, and you would almost be better off paying one goalie the combined salary and more worried about the money going elsewhere in your lineup. But I think if you're the Oilers, you have some real soul searching to do. I would be entertaining the idea of replacing Stan Bowman. I wasn't particularly interested in going into the Stan Bowman business to begin with as the Oilers. I think their willingness to get him involved in their franchise, despite his role in that 2010 Brad Aldrich Blackhawks scandal, does not look good for anybody because they got down and said, this guy's won cups. We'll do whatever it takes to win. And now you look stupid. He has made you look stupid with some of the moves he's made. And you face a summer where you're 12 months away, again, from potentially having to navigate Connor McDavid's. You are conceptually 12 months away from a summer where Connor McDavid could just up and tell you, I don't want to re-sign, trade me. Everything in your power, if you're the Edmonton Oilers, needs to be oriented around getting McDavid to agree to an extension as soon as he is eligible in summer 2027. Nothing else matters. I know you have Draisaitl and Bouchard under contract for next year into the near future. Bouchard will have 2 more years after this upcoming season. Draisaitl very early on in the stages of that 8-year deal he signed in 2024. But you're starting over if you trade McDavid, and the Oilers are so leveraged for right now. They gave Jake Wallman a 7-year deal. They gave Ekholm an extension. They gave Trent Frederick the extension where he had more years than goals scored this year. You still have a couple more years of Nugent Hopkins and Zach Hyman. You do not have the flexibility to say, we're going to trade McDavid for all of King Midas's silver, to quote White Goodman from Dodgeball. You are not going to get anything comparable. Even if you get San Jose to give you Michael Misa and Will Smith and like 3 draft picks, that's not going to comp to McDavid. If you could get Lane Hudson and Jacob Fowler and draft picks from Montreal, that still wouldn't be worth what Connor McDavid is worth to you as one player who is capable of doing that. The Oilers almost certainly have missed their window of contention, and they're going to have to deal with the consequences of messing it up. They had chances over the last 2 years to kind of close their holes and maybe look a little bit more towards their future. Now, they are a possible candidate for a bounce back. I have a hard time seeing that based on the players they have in-house right now. A lot of the guys who underperformed this year aren't young guys looking to break out. They're older guys trying to hang on. And if the old guys trying to hang on need to bounce back, it's a really unlikely proposition based on where the game is at now. As far as the rest of the series, I'll go quick with Ottawa and Carolina because that's the one we're furthest removed from. Ditto for LA, Colorado. LA, Colorado, I feel bad for the Kings. Kopitar probably deserved a little bit better on the way out. They're not that good. They had 20 overtime and shootout losses. They played really good defense. If I could give Colorado credit for anything, it's that they were able to break down the Kings defense enough that they could score enough goals to sweep them. The Kings did about as good a job defensively as being a defense-first team against the league's best offense as you can do, and they still got swept out of the building. The Kings could not score at even strength. The Kings could not score on the power play. As good as Kempe, Panarin, and Kopitar were down the stretch in the regular season, they had a 66% goal share over the final month post-trade deadline. One line is not good enough when you are playing a team of Colorado's caliber that has the best 1-2-3 center punch in the league, that has puck movers like Makar and Taves, and has McKinnon, who is playing at a Hart Trophy caliber level. You're not going to be able to overcome that. Now, as far as Carolina, Ottawa, I picked Ottawa in 7 games, and my entire impetus was good goalies give Carolina a hard time. Shesterkin, Vasilevskiy, Tuukka Rask, Braden Holtby. We have seen really good goalies give the Hurricanes problems where they're a volume-based offense, and if you fling garbage, if you fling low-quality chances with clear sight lines at guys like Shesterkin or Vasilevskiy or Bobrovsky, they make the saves. The Rangers have never really outplayed the Hurricanes at 5-on-5 in the playoffs in 22 or 24. They've had spurts where they can score off the counter and stuff, but Carolina always controls the flow of the games. Carolina always has more scoring chances, always has more expected goals. When you have a Shesterkin who can absorb a lot of pressure and still play well, that unlocks doors for you and alternate paths to victory. Most teams cannot replicate that. So with the idea that Ullmark, who was really good for them down the stretch in the regular season, over the final 9 starts, a .903 save percentage, if I remember correctly. And Ullmark was great. He had 10 goals saved above expected in 4 games under constant barrage. The Senators could not score at even strength. They couldn't score on the power play. Their offense was supposed to translate well to a series like this against Carolina, who all of their defensemen are pretty decent, but none of them are exemplary beyond Slavin. And I always have said Slavin's a little too overhyped because he's not a great puck mover, but he is very good defensively. But they couldn't break him down. They couldn't get a cycle going. They couldn't get a forecheck going. They could not relieve any of the pressure they faced, and they spent 4 straight games getting shelled. The Senators never led at any point in that series. Tim Stützle and Brady Tkachuk combined for 1 point, which was a Stützle assist. I think the Senators have some awkward questions they're going to need to answer. I think they have a very nice core of young pieces. You have Tkachuk, you have Stützle, you still have Drake Batherson, you have Dylan Cousins, you have Sanderson, you have Spence. That's a really solid starting point. We'll see if Claude Giroux comes back. We'll see if Ullmark can put that behind-the-scenes stuff that kept him out of the lineup at times this year to bed, and he can come into next year and play a full starter's workload. But the Senators down the stretch, with all the injuries they were dealing with, especially on defense, they're making the playoffs in of itself felt like a real accomplishment. But now the Senators have made the playoffs 2 years in a row for the first time since the early 2010s. If the Senators are going to make the leap from playoff team to Stanley Cup contender, that will require decisive action. If that's turning Thomas Chabot as an expensive defenseman who isn't your power play 1 quarterback into players, do it. If that means you're going to trade Brady Tkachuk for the most desperate offer imaginable from the Rangers or the Blues or the Panthers, you entertain that idea if you think it's going to make you better. We've heard a lot about what Steve Staios wants to do, another 30-goal scorer, another defenseman. Every insider wants to get every player to every market because it's good content. There are not going to be a lot of 30-goal scorers on the market on July 1st. Maybe Alex Tuck, and that's if the Senators let it get that far, to say the least. As far as Tampa Bay, Montreal, I think it's over, man. I picked Tampa Bay to win the series. I picked Tampa Bay to win the cup. And very much like what I said about Ottawa, what I said about Ottawa going into the series, what I had said about Minnesota going into Dallas, what I said about Oilers going into the Ducks, I just kind of assumed Tampa Bay's championship DNA would take over the same way I kind of assumed the Hurricanes as being preemptive early exits or disappointing exits wouldn't be able to beat a goalie of Ullmark's caliber, and they shelled him, and they proved me very wrong. Tampa Bay, I thought, had everything it needed to break through for the first time in a long time. I thought the work they got out of Moser and Radish this year on the back end was nothing short of remarkable. Salvaged guys, buy low candidates, and got incredible results out of those guys. Now, people will say, well, no Victor Hedman, and Braden Point was hurt, and Nikita Kucherov wasn't himself. Unfortunately, at this point, that's the story. You can use the narrative context a couple of times. They haven't gotten out of the first round since 2022. Yeah, they've played the Panthers multiple times, and the Panthers went on to win the Stanley Cup. Sure. This was a series they could have won. They probably should have beat Montreal. And with all of those teams, with Tampa, with Carolina, with Dallas, with Edmonton, I am not alone in overrating previous experience as an indicator of what's to come. I definitely think there's room, especially at the start of the playoffs, to kind of take a step back and reevaluate. And to Montreal's credit, man, they're a really fun team. I love the way they've gone about putting together their group. They still have several years in front of them. They have an opportunity to be as aggressive or as pensive as they would like. And kudos to Jacob Dobeshev, man. Dobeš has been nothing short of miraculous. I can recall recording an episode of Locked On NHL with Hunter Hodes, who does Locked On Penguins, probably in February, maybe March, where I had said if Montreal just gets decent goaltending, they have a real chance in the East because of the lack of quality overall in the East. I've pretty much felt all year that whoever won the Atlantic part of the bracket, whether that was Buffalo, Tampa, or Montreal, was going to win the East. I know Carolina had the best regular season record. I know Carolina has historically been a regular season team and kind of flopped in the playoffs when they've gotten to stiffer competition. And I think you'd take Buffalo. I think you'd take Montreal, and you would definitely have taken Tampa talent-wise against Carolina. But maybe I'm continuing to misjudge Carolina based on their previous experiences. But with all of that said, man, Dobeš outplayed Andrei Vasilevskiy in this series. That is not something to be taken lightly. And look, Vasilevsky's older now. He is not the same big cat he was 5 years ago when he won a Conn Smythe trophy. He has won a Vezina trophy. I don't know if that same Vasilevsky's ever coming back. And that's not to say he's not good. He had a pretty good regular season. He was a Vezina trophy finalist, but he got outplayed. And the numbers, not crazy. Vasilevskiy, 897 save, 218 goals against. He didn't face a lot of shots. If you give up 2.18 goals per game on an 897 save, you weren't bad. You had 3.9 goals saved above expected in 7 games. That's not terrible. But Dobeš was better. Dobeš 923 save, 8.5 goals saved above expected. And if you watch the interview with the TNT panel after the game, you barely seem to be breaking a sweat. I love the archetypal young goalie. They are one of my favorite things in hockey. You look, especially in Montreal, where you have that great historic lineage of Dryden and Waugh and Carey Price. And now maybe it's Dobeš, maybe it's Jacob Fowler. Ultimately, I think Montreal is going to have to make a decision. You can't have 2 blue chip goalies in a tandem. It would be a very strange allocation of resources. I think ultimately they'll end up picking one or the other, and generally teams are going to pick the older goalie. We've seen a lot of teams do this, which is weird. If you were asking me, you probably err with the younger guy, gives you more years. But if you're looking at goalies and you already have a goalie who's proven himself to be pretty good at the NHL level, that's hard to come by. So you're less inclined to roll the dice and wait on the prospects. For Tampa Bay, man, where do you go? If you're Tampa Bay, what can you do to get better? What veteran, what cost-sensitive move can you make? They're almost certainly going to lose Radish to free agency this summer. I would be shocked if they could afford to keep him. I think they're going to have to try and remake their bottom 6 again, and I do think their lack of offense has become an issue for them at times. I think you see the limitations of where Kucherov is at in his game at present. Kucherov, to his credit, has been one of the era's defining players. Over the last 10 years, there's maybe 4 or 5 guys who have a better resume than Kucherov. But he's older now. He's a little more limited offensively, and Montreal did a good job. You give up all the scoring chances, all the shots on goal, and you still win, and you do that pretty consistently in a series. Sure, it's difficult, but it's not impossible. Now, Montreal-Buffalo might be the series I am most excited about on paper, just because I think there's going to be a lot of offense, and I think there's going to be a lot of chances, and I think that lends itself nicely to the neutral perspective. But as far as the audit and trying to refine my takes and learn a little bit, number one, gotta stop overrating past histories. I think that's what bit me in the butt the hardest in all 4 of those series, is expecting the teams that had won previously or the teams that had messed up previously to continue to do that, to not look at the team for what it is at present as opposed to thinking about what it is in the past. I think I'm also a little too inclined to err on the side of experience versus inexperience. It was pretty much the deciding factor in Tampa Bay, Montreal for me. I thought Tampa Bay had all the playoff experience, all the big game experience, and they have John Cooper. And look, I think Marty St. Louis is as good of a person coach as you can have. His strategy, his tactics, that you could take or leave. I do think the way the Canadians play probably isn't very sustainable long run, but they were good. They were good enough. And the individual talents, if Montreal can win a playoff series where Caulfield and Suzuki are outscored at even strength and do it, that's really impressive. If their most difficult path to victory works for them, that means all they got to do is get to their easier paths to victory, and that opens more doors. Okay, that will do it for this week's edition of the Theory of Hockey Show. If you're still listening, that means you get the hints on the quizzes for the rest of the week. So starting on Tuesday, we have a Ducks puzzle, like I had said earlier in the show. On Tuesday, we have a Ducks puzzle based on playoff history. On Wednesday, we have a 50 and 07 based question for the Danny Heatley heads out there. On Thursday, we have a money question, so go brush up on your Puckpedia. Friday, we are celebrating goalies. And then on Saturday, the kids are all right. Those are your hints for the puzzles for the rest of the week. theoryofhockey.com/puck if you want to play. It is entirely free. I will talk to you guys next week, where we might have series over at that point in the second round. Talk to you guys then. Subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Check out the quiz on the website. More games to come. Substack articles every day this week. I will talk to you guys real soon.